I really can't stand the whole center part trend thing. Not that I liked the side part, I think it was kind of messed up, but like my center part will never center part in the way that I want it to. It's always going to be like slightly off kilter, and I've considered just giving up. Yeah. Hi, welcome back to the channel. My name is Lindy Jung. I am a science fiction and fantasy writer, and here I talk about writing, books, and basically whatever else I feel like. Today's topic is going to be what I'm going to call tough love advice for, fantasy writers, usually newer ones, but I see these mistakes in published books quite often. I won't even call them mistakes, I'll call them things that I kind of don't like, I guess. All of these things will be very craft and story focused, but yeah, that's pretty much it. As a little caveat, these are totally based off my own opinion. What works for you might not work for me, and vice versa. And I just sort of wanted to share my thoughts and hopefully, dispense some advice that'll help you guys become better fantasy writers, because at the end of the day, that is always my goal. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I made a numbered list, but I don't really know how many items are on here, so I think I'm just gonna kind of run through them. Number one is that your super unique, fancy, shiny, sparkly fantasy idea has probably already been done before, and that is totally fine. You just gotta keep writing, and you just gotta find a way to make it so specific to you and your interests that no one else has come up with this exact iteration of words. No idea is original, and ideas don't really sell anyway. You have to write the book, so put all of your energy into the book. Don't get deterred just because someone else has done Magic Wizard School. Number two is very similar. It's that the market is super competitive for fantasy right now, especially if you're writing young adult, and you do need to stand out, especially if your book sort of leans heavily on these familiar tropes. This feels like it's the opposite of the first one, but I promise it's not. If you're doing something like quests or the chosen one or something along those lines in your plot, then you definitely need some sort of twist, something to just throw into the pitch to make it sound a little bit different from your usual cookie cutter fantasy book. Number three is that pitching ability really matters, especially for your speculative fiction. I know that us fantasy writers, we like to kind of get a little long-winded, and we kind of don't always know what the hook of our story is, but you have to. I don't really know how else to put it. You have to be able to pitch, because if you're pursuing traditional publishing or even self-publishing to a certain degree, you have to be able to condense that really complicated world and story and all those character arcs into something that is bite-sized and catchy. Number four is that comp titles do matter a lot as well, but there's another caveat here, and it's that if your comp title is something that's really famous and ubiquitous in fantasy, like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, or even Avatar: The Last Airbender, I don't know why that one has been tossed around so much lately. In any case, those big popular titles aren't really going to work really well as comp titles, so be sure that you know your genre, your subgenre, your age category. Just know what market you'll be pitching into. Number five is that you do not need to world build down to the last detail. I think this is because I do have the attention span of a goldfish, but I cannot handle really world building heavy, long-winded fantasy books that get down to the freaking tiniest detail of the local sewage system or whatever, or local law enforcement, unless it's relevant to the plot. Your readers probably don't care. Your average Joe does not care. And honestly, I don't care either. So just reconsider if you need those details. It's totally fine to come up with them on your own time for fun, and to just sort of have them, I guess, if that's what's entertaining for you. I will not judge, but if it's in your book and it doesn't need to be, then maybe consider its place there, and whether or not it's really important that you talk about the local apple varieties. Number six is to focus on fundamentals first. I feel like a lot of the time, especially with fantasy books that do pitch really well and are very snappy and have a really cool hook and concept, sometimes things like plot and story structure and character arcs fall to the wayside in favor of tropes, or that really cool mech suit, steampunk, dragon fighting, society, world building. That was a nonsense sentence, but you know what I mean. It focuses more on the glitz and the glam of the exterior versus the actual meat, bones, and potatoes of a good story. I think nothing agitates me more these days than opening up a book that had a really good pitch and a really, really catchy I don't know what else to say other than like synopsis, something that really drew me in, and then finding out it's basically not about anything else. The pitch should not be a summary for the book, it should be a hook to grab your interest, and there should actually be some substance there. Number 7, watch your pacing. I think I'm gonna talk about pacing in basically every like overall writing advice video that I make, because pacing is so important and it's really hard and you have to actually study it and learn it unless you're some sort of like pacing wizard, in which case good for you. But in any case, if your pacing feels off, then your story structure probably just needs to be re-examined. Number 8 is that 3-act structure is a good starting point. If every story ever written in the English language completely and totally adhered to 3-act structure, I think nobody would read, because why? It would just get very stale very fast. And I always harp on structure because I think it is a really important tool to use when you're sort of building up your plot from the bones up, but it should not be treated like the Bible. Like, you should not be following it to the letter every single time. You should not be using the Save the Cat beat sheet to the letter with the percentages and everything. Just, you know, chill. Let the story sort of guide you and just use that as a jumping off point so you know, and so you have something to refer back to if your pacing starts to feel weird. On the flip side, you do need to understand structure pretty well just so you understand the bones of every story, because these are the bones of pretty much every story, even if it doesn't seem like it. These like really basic fundamental story building blocks are things that you should know if you're going to be a storyteller, just so you have the knowledge. You know, you wouldn't let someone be a biochemist and work with, you know, like insane medical technology if they didn't know what hydrochloric acid was. Number 10 is, honestly, a lot of fantasy writers don't read widely enough. I feel like if you are reading the same books over and over again by the same like 3 old white dudes, 2 of whom are dead, then you probably need to pick up a book by a marginalized author once in a while. I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir here just because I don't think my audience is necessarily that type of fantasy writer, but trust me, they exist. And it really bothers me because, like, there's so much good, innovative, interesting fantasy coming out from authors of color, marginalized authors. And I feel like it's very easy for some people in certain demographics to go, oh, you know, they just got published because of like a diversity quota at the publishing house or whatever, but that's really not true. And I implore you to, you know, expand your horizons a little bit, read a little widely. I have book recommendation videos if you need a starting off point, but there's so much out there, and I swear, I promise, there will be something that will appeal to everyone. Number 11 is to be super careful about utilizing those like classic fantasy species like goblins, orcs, even elves, because a lot of that kind of, you know, it's predicated on some pretty bad stereotypes, and you just want to have like an awareness of how your portrayal of, you know, like a goblin that is really like money hungry and has a big nose, or an orc that speaks like a stilted language and has slanted eyes and doesn't wear a lot of clothes or wears animal furs. Like, you want to just sort of have an awareness of where those like images came from, what period of time they originated in, what racist author's mind they originated in. Just knowing that fantasy and speculative fiction in general have sort of had some, you know, complicated issues in the past and have also been used metaphorically to represent certain groups in not the best light, I think is really helpful moving forward into like the 21st century, where we're not going to be writing about those things anymore, and we're not going to have racist depictions of actual real living groups thinly veiled as like little like green-skinned men. We're not going to do that anymore. Number 12 is very similar, and it is to be really incredibly careful about writing about cultures that are not your own. I think when it comes to larger fantasy world building, when you have multiple continents, obviously you don't want them all to be like a homogenous race. That is kind of weird. You don't want them to be culturally, racially, religiously homogenous. It's bad world building when you're getting on that scale. The only thing is, if you have like the token Asian country, are they like mystics who wear long flowing robes and have like long ponytails and speak really stilted for some reason? People always write fantasy Asians with like the most stilted dialogue ever. Are you only including, you know, East Asians? Are you only including these like far off mystical, you know, people of the Orient, and then like, a white country, that's normal. And then do you have like a very far removed country that is supposed to be Africa and they're just, you know, not super well represented. I don't even want to go into the stereotypes I've seen for that. Or do you have like the Middle East, you know, like MENA countries represented in a weird way as well? Wow. You know, Game of Thrones, I think, really set us back in a lot of ways, honestly. Understand your harmful stereotypes. Understand that you might not be shining the best light on yourself if you're just falling back on the same racist tropes and caricatures over and over again. Get sensitivity readers if you have these characters or these cultures or whatever groups playing a larger role in the story. Just be, like, sort of sensitive. Write us like people, you know? Number 13 is a pet peeve of mine, and it's that a lot of the time, fantasy characters do not feel like human beings to me. Even if they have a character arc, even if they have growth and development, sometimes they just don't feel like people. Okay, this is like 2014 Tumblr era writing advice, so I don't really want to like condone it, but it is important to be like, you know, to make your characters feel real. Can you imagine them doing something really boring and mundane, like grocery shopping, or just like picking up a pizza, or like having a night in, you know? And like, how would they behave in that situation? I just think that fantasy that forgoes interesting and relatable and realistic characterization for like political machinations and world building and sewage systems and hard magic, those things are really cool, but at the end of the day, I feel like myself and a lot of maybe more casual readers, or just readers in general, are probably reading the story for the characters, and we are going to read the story all the way through because we get attached to the characters, not because we're waiting to see someone explain the really niche world building of like necromancy or whatever. Number 14 is to read books outside of the fantasy genre. One of the weirdest things I've noticed while reading more recent fantasy books is that the writing is just not at the level that I want it to be, even in adult fantasy lit. So my encouragement to everyone is to read poetry, read literary, read classics, read romance, read like, you know, sci-fi, horror, read different things, draw inspiration from different places, learn different ways to phrase that sentence, or describe golden hair. I think it is very easy to sort of fall into the details when it comes to fantasy and forget about the writing and focus more on like the world building and the creating, which are all super important and really amazing and a ton of fun, but you want a good reading experience as well. Or at least I want a good reading experience as well. Alright, that concludes this video. Thank you so much for bearing with me through this 14-part rant. Again, none of this is meant to shame anyone at all. It's kind of like tongue-in-cheek, because Lord knows I have committed most of these sins myself. If this helps, if you have your own like tough love bits of advice for fantasy writers or things that you've noticed, trends you've noticed in recent fantasy books and maybe like aren't that fond of, that's mostly where this stems from for me, more so than like reading unpublished manuscripts. Anyway, you drop your own thoughts below. That pretty much sums it up, so I'm going to go ahead and head out, and I will see you guys next time.